Okay.
Yes,
I am
it's
now
just
recording.
begun. Perfect.
Okay, so I will do the recording. I'm going to put it under Prac 11, and the TAs, when they run this meeting individually, will also record those. So there'll be lots of examples for you to follow if you need to have examples about how to analyze your data. So the reason we decided to do a really big prac with everyone this week was firstly because I took Letava's group last week and it was really fun to interact with you guys personally. Secondly, because this prac, for the first half of this prac, is quite interactive and it would be better to do it as a big group. So we're going to do the first half of this prac together as big a group as we can, 66 people so far. And then the second half of the prac is more hands-on, where you learn how to analyze your data in Excel, and then we'll break off and you can engage with your individual TAs about that. So I think we'll get started immediately if that's okay, because some people have data issues. If anyone wants to make a question or raise an issue now, then please go ahead. Otherwise, we'll get started. Okay, I'm going to start by sharing my screen so that I can talk you through the practical. And then I'm going to just go to the practical. So now we're in practical 11. In practical 10, all of you guys have submitted practical 10 last night. Thank you so much for submitting it. And thank you for those of you who entered the data onto the spreadsheet. We have over 100 people who've entered data, so that's good. We have some good data to work with. Now in practical 11, we're going to start preparing you guys for the final research report, which you're going to submit, I think, on the 12th of June. So for the next 4 lectures, the next 4 pracs, we're going to be preparing for this final research report. You're going to be learning how to do different parts of a research report. You're going to get feedback from your TAs about what you did right and wrong, so that you can submit a really good final report at the end and get a good mark. But the first thing you need to do for this report is to develop a research question and to learn how to test hypotheses. So that's why I thought it'd be easier to do it as a big group. We basically want to teach you in this practical how to design a research question and how to develop some hypotheses that you will then test using data from your field trip. So we have all the data. So you first, basically, by this stage of the course, you should have a wide-ranging knowledge of ecological theory, and you should have some good understanding about how savannas function. But now is your opportunity to test some of these ideas. No longer will you just have to trust me and Bob when we tell you that a soil that has a high sand content is going to have more tree biomass than a soil with a low sand content, which is what I told you in a lecture this week. You can now go and test it because we have all the information available for you to go and have a look. We have tree biomass, we have soil sand content, and we also have information on water holding capacity of that soil. So you can go and use the data to test some of these ideas that we've been teaching you. So your job today is to develop a research question that you will be able to answer using the data available from the field trip. But the exact question that you choose to answer is up to you. So the other thing we're trying to teach you here is how to do independent research and be creative. Up till now, in your school and undergrad career, you've probably just been told what to do and then you've done it. From now on, we're going to be teaching you through the rest of your undergrad to how to be creative and how to be creative scientists and how to ask questions. So it's really going to be up to you exactly what research question you decide to do. You can focus on a particular research question. For example, if you're really interested in soils, you can make your entire final report about soils. Or if you're very interested in how herbivores engage with vegetation, you can make your entire final report around herbivores. Or you could go for a big, broad question about how savannas function. So you definitely don't need to use all the data that you collected, but you can if you want to. So I'm just going to remind you how much data we've collected. We've got information on the amount of tree biomass, the amount of grass biomass. We've got the number of tree species, how many of those species are fine-leafed versus broad-leafed, how many of those species have spines and herbivore defenses. We have the number of grass species and the species composition. We have how many of the grass plots were grazed, so some measure of where the herbivores were grazing on the Catena. And then from the soils pracs, you have information on soil texture, soil depth, soil moisture content, soil porosity, soil field capacity, electrical conductivity, and pH. So you can now link the soils data to the vegetation data, to the herbivore data, to start to ask questions around interactions between these things in savannas. This is what you need to do. And I'm going to, I mean, if I was in the lab with you, we would all be circulating. We'd give you guys 5 minutes to come up with a research question. And then we would come, and we and the TAs would come and engage with you about this research question. So I don't know how it's going to really work online, but I'm hoping a few of you will be brave enough to maybe suggest what you think would be an interesting research question, and then we can discuss it together in this MS Teams meeting. So I'm going to give you everyone 5 minutes to come up with a research hypothesis. What you need to do is to use your knowledge of savanna ecology and think of a research question that can be answered with your data. The first thing you want to think of is an overall aim, like what's the big question I want to ask? And then after you've worked out what your overall aim is, then we will help you to turn that into some testable hypotheses. Because as you probably will have learned in science, the whole point about science is that we can test our ideas. We come up with hypotheses about how the world works, and then we use data to test whether that's true or not. So the first thing you need to do is say, I'm really interested in how soil characteristics change as you go down a soil pit profile. So I want to know how soil characteristics change with depth in savanna systems. And then your testable hypotheses can be things like, I expect that there will be higher clay content at the bottom of the profile than the top of the profile. And I expect that there will be higher cation exchange capacity at the bottom of the profile than the top of the profile. So that's an aim and objective that's just related to soils. But you could come up with another one. You could have an objective, an aim like, I want to understand how vegetation responds to soil conditions down a Katina in savannas. So that's a big overall aim, but you'd first need to divide that up into some smaller hypotheses before you could test it with your data. So I'm going to give everyone 5 minutes just to have a look. I'm hoping most of you have this Practical 11 in front of you. It's available to download on the e-learning site. Think about all of the data that's available, and then think about what interested you in the field. What did you actually enjoy thinking about? So what would you like to write your research report on? So I'm going to provide 5 minutes for you to do that, and then I'm hoping that some people will come up and tell me what their ideas are. If you're totally stuck and you don't know what to do, I've added some example hypotheses that you could create using the data that we've got. So you can scroll down to page 2 in the prac and have a look at some of the example hypotheses that I've thought about. So I'm going to just leave everyone to think about that for 5 minutes, and then we're going to start engaging about it. If anyone wants to ask a question about what's expected of them, then please go ahead. Otherwise, I expect that you're all frantically scribbling away your main aim and objective. If any of you have just arrived, then what we're doing now is we're working through Prac 11, and we're working through task 1 of Prac 11, where you have to write down your overall aim and objective for your research project. Okay, there are now 85 people in the group, so some of you must have just arrived. For those of you who's just arrived, what we're doing is the first task, practical task 1, where you're deciding on an aim and objective for your research report. So those of you who's just arrived, open Prac 11, read through what we're trying to do, and then start to think, what would you like to study? What would you like to think about and analyze, and what data would you like to analyze for the next few weeks? You've had, those of you who've been here for a while, you've had about 3 or 4 minutes to think about an aim and objective. I'm wondering whether any of you is brave enough to tell us what you would like to study for your research report. If you are, then just unmute yourself and give us your ideas. If you're not brave enough to speak, then how about you write down your aim and objective in the chat?
Somebody had said just deleted now.
Ah, somebody's waiting to join.
Okay.
Coming. Okay, who would like to speak? I might have to pick on some people that I actually know in this course. Hadil, would you like to give us your idea?
Well, yes. So
Great.
what I wanted to talk about is the tree biome amount in the savanna, like the amount of tree biomes in the savanna. So the way I can go about it is by first talking about how is there like more vegetation on top of the Catena or below,
Great.
and how much clay content is like above there or down there, because basically the more clay, the less trees, I think.
Right,
And,
keep going.
And also about the cations, like that, relate that to the clay.
Great. So that sounds like a good aim and objective. So you're interested in biomass, you're interested in productivity, like which savannas are the most productive? Is it the sandy ones at the top or the clay ones at the bottom? So you're going to look at tree
talk about
biomass.
fertile as well. Fertility,
Right.
maybe, and thickness.
So you could say, if there's more productivity at the top, is it because it's more fertile or because there's more water? So you could kind of trade off, because plants need water and nutrients to grow.
Yes,
so that sounds...
and I'm not sure if we can talk about salinity too.
Yeah, so salt content doesn't usually stop plants from growing. I mean, if it's really salty, then plants can be inhibited. So salt content doesn't necessarily make it hard for plants to grow, but salt content can make it nice for animals, because animals really need salt. Just like humans like salt, animals also like salt. So if you looked at salt content as well, then maybe your aim would be getting a bit big, because you'd have to start bringing in information on herbivores and stuff. So you could keep that in mind, keep the salt at the back of your mind. But I think if you just focus on biomass and productivity, and whether it's nutrients or water that create more biomass, that would probably be enough of an aim and objective, and enough to write a research report on.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Great. So that's a lovely aim and objective. Now the next step for you, Hadil, is to start thinking, well, what data would I use? You've already said you're going to use the cation exchange. You're going to maybe use your information on field capacity. That's a good way to measure how much water is available to plants. Or do you remember you calculated the plant available water content? So you could go pull that information out, and you could see whether the